Welcome to another stimulating interview with Dr. John Demartini. I'm Liliane Grace, author of The Mastery Club and several other books and programs, and I have with me Dr. John Demartini, international behavioral specialist, author of the best-selling The Breakthrough Experience and numerous other books and programs. John, I don't think that introduction does you justice, so I encourage all viewers and listeners to go to drdemartini.com to learn more about Dr. Demartini. Welcome.
Thank you for
I'm
having me.
it's always a pleasure, always a pleasure. So, um, we've had these interviews a number of times over the last almost 20 years, would you believe? I was calculating. And
We're
I'm
getting
really
younger.
delighted.
We're getting younger.
We are. We look great, don't we? So I was really delighted that you were going to be available again to touch on a couple of topics that are front of mind for me at the moment. And the first one is randomness. Oh, sorry, not randomness, or that was going to be second. The first one is relativism versus absolutism. So relativism is this doctrine that knowledge, truth, and morality exist in relation to culture, society, historical context. Yeah. And in fact, one of the presuppositions of NLP is that all meaning is contextual. But there are plenty who say that there is something's absolutely right or wrong. And certainly we have an innate sense of what's right and wrong. So I would like to just pass the talking stick to you, John, to share your thoughts about absolutism versus relativism. Where do the distinctions lie? Thank you.
Do I have to give you a 1 minute answer? Or can I elaborate?
You can elaborate.
Okay, good. In our lovely brain,
Hmm.
we have the cortical and the subcortical area. Think of the cortex as the shell of a walnut and the subcortical as the nut, the nuclei in the walnut. That's why they call the nuclei the nutcase or the nut house. People working from the subcortical are a little bit nuttier. I'm joking. They're less governed. Now, when you are functioning from the nuclei, the subcortical nuclei, in this case, the amygdala and the hippocampus, you have a different perspective or perception than if you're working from the cortical or medial prefrontal cortex area. Now, how is this different? One is called a systems one thinking, the nuclei, the amygdala. The other is a systems two thinking. One is for emergencies, and the other is for when you're for survival, emergencies, and the other is for thrival and long-term objectives.
Yeah.
So one is more emotional and one is more reasonable. One you feel before you think, the other you think before you feel.
Yeah.
Now, these two distinctions give rise to the two types of moral instruction or moral ideas from absolutism in systems one to relativism in systems two.
Right.
Now, let me elaborate on that and why this is occurring. This is a bit of a, seems like a tangent initially, but it'll come through. A octopus out in the wild is a great camouflager. It can convert its body into sand looking, seaweed looking, or coral looking
Mhm.
to protect itself from being seen by prey so it can capture prey, or predator so it can escape predator.
Mhm.
When it does that, in order to capture prey or predator, it has to distort its perception to increase the adrenaline strong enough to run faster than the prey or the predator. So it's designed to subjectively distort a subjective bias. It's called a false positive and a false negative. A false positive is seeing something that is there that's not there, and a false negative is not seeing something that is there. So in order for the prey to capture the prey, the octopus has to have a false positive to accentuate the benefits of the prey and to diminish the drawbacks of the prey in order to run fast enough to capture it. So it has to distort it and exaggerate the pleasure
Yeah.
to create the adrenaline to do it. So it distorts it and exaggerates.
Yeah.
So, in fact, if you were to have prey without predator, you would be fat, gluttonous, and lose fitness. If you were to have predator without prey, you'd be starved and emaciated and lose fitness.
Mm.
If you have a balance of prey and predator in the ecosystem, you maximize fitness. Maximum growth and development occurs at the border of support and challenge, or
Yeah.
prey and predator.
Yeah.
Order and chaos, sometimes called. Now, so we, when we're in systems one thinking, distort the ratio of perceptions in order to create the adrenaline response, because otherwise we'd fear the loss of prey or fear of gain of predator. So we have to distort it to get running fast enough to not be eaten by the predator and make sure we capture the prey.
Mm.
So the absolute belief system that something is absolutely good and no evil, or absolutely evil and no good, or absolutely positive and no negative, or absolutely negative, no positive, or actually benefit without drawback, or drawback without benefit, which leads to the absolutist perspective, is an amygdala response. They're usually fundamentalists, that are extremist, that are seeing things in terms of absolute so they can avoid and seek, like a prey and predator, or a predator and prey in this case. Now, this can go from a ratio of 1 to 1, which is perfectly balanced, to 2 to 1, 3 to 1, 4 to 1, 5 to 1, 6 to 1, 7 to 1, and up until it's infinity to 1. Infinity to 1 is an absolute, all positive, no negative.
Yep.
If it's, or the other way, 1 over infinity, it's all negative, no positive in ratios. So the amygdala is what's able to distort the perception in order to accentuate the adrenaline to capture prey and predator.
Mm.
If you're not in survival, but you're in thrival, and you're not trying to run from predator or seek prey, you're just in poised state, you have a 1 to 1 ratio, which means that every event has both sides, positive and negative. Therefore, it's a relative system based on a context. Now, so anytime we perceive something from my mom was never there for me, and I pride myself in always being there for people, we have absolutist thinking. Now, the fact is, it doesn't exist. There is no such thing as a one-sided event.
Yeah.
But people believe it when they're in survival mode in order to protect themselves from predator or protect themselves from starving from prey.
Mm.
So fundamentalism, absolutism, radicalism is an amygdala response of survival that creates black and white thinking so we can make decisions with our amygdala rapidly to avoid predator and seek prey. So absolute evil is a predator, absolute good is a prey. Absolute heaven, absolute hell. Absolute reward, absolute punishment. These are amygdala-based systems that are fundamentalist states in politics, religion, and morality. Now, if we are able to see both sides of something simultaneously, as Wilhelm Wundt, the father of psychology stated, father of experimental psychology stated, we realize that it has both sides. And this is what systems two thinking in the cortex, the medial prefrontal cortex, the executive center sees. It governs and dampens the volatilities and extremes of the amygdala and make us go into the executive center where we have more reason. We're more self-governed. And therefore we realize, as John Milton said, within our thinking can make a heaven out of a hell or a hell out of a heaven. And so relativism is a more poised state when
Mm.
you're not in survival. It's more reasonable. Now let's use it into a practical example here. Let's say I meet this girl and I am a little bit infatuated with her. and I think, oh, this girl's unique. She's all positive, no negative. And I'm blinded by an infatuation. Well, that's my amygdala. And I'm going to want to consume her like she's prey. I want to chomp on her.
Yep.
When I'm doing that, I'm blind to the downside. So I'm unconscious of the downside and I'm only conscious of the upside. And if it's all positive and no negative, this girl has no negative, it's all positive, then I'm in an absolute state. But what happens over a day, a week, a month, a year when I start hanging out with her? I start discovering the things I was unconscious of.
Mm-hmm.
So in order to have an absolutist view, you have to ignore information.
Yes.
And when you ignore information, you're blind, right? You're unconscious. And this absolutist perspective is guaranteed to be unconscious. It's a blinded viewpoint. But it makes easy for masses of people who don't want to think, but just want to be told what to do. So the mass consciousness loves the absolutist because they don't have to think. I follow this is good and this is bad.
Yep.
And this is right and this is wrong. Now, the girl is not all positive, is she? If you get to stay with her for a period of time, you find out that that was a fatal attraction delusion, right? Michael Douglas and Glenn Close. But you discover over time by the central limit theorem that the greater the sample of experiences you have with a girl, the more likely it comes to the golden mean. It comes to what they call a mean distribution of positives and negatives. So over time, you become more neutral about the girl and you see both sides and you realize she's neither positive nor negative. She's neither good nor evil. She's got both sides. She's a human being in different contexts and different moments. She'll play out one side, another moment she'll play out another. If I was to say to you, you're always positive and never negative, you'd go, no, 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 that's not true. If I said you're always negative, you're never positive, you go, no, that's not true. If I said sometimes you're positive, sometimes you're negative, you go, yep, that's true. Mm-hmm. So relativism is more truthful and more objective about experiences. And when we're in survival mode, we tend to be more absolute with our amygdala. And we do that because of false positives and false negatives. We have to do that because if we erred on a false negative and it's prey, we'd starve. And if we erred on a false negative and it was predator, we'd end up being eaten. So we have to distort that. So people that are functioning from a ignoring state be more likely to be absolutist. So you take a person, there's Islamic extremists or Christian extremists or whatever that are black and white. There's no good. Right now, we're seeing it right now in Israel and Iran. Iran basically is saying that Israel is all evil, and,
Yep.
and Israel is saying that Iran's all evil.
Yep.
Now, I've been to Iran and I've been to Israel, and the people there are lovely people, both of them.
Yeah.
And I'm sure there's positive and negatives in everybody in that place. But right now, there's a survival mode because Israel's afraid of being eliminated by a nuclear bomb or something. And so when they're in survival mode, they go into absolutisms and then they react with black and white. Mm. So relativism is when you're more reasonable, you're more aware, you're fully conscious, you see both sides, you understand it's context determined, and it's based on some artificial thing that you're claiming is good and bad. If you say that life is good and death is bad, then you can now make a context for it. But nature doesn't do that. When an animal eats a prey and it gives life to its offspring, it kills this one. And if it doesn't get it and it misses the prey, they save alive, but you die. So is life or death good? No, in nature it's not. It's based on an artificial context that you made up that life is good and death is bad. Mm-hmm. So we start with a premise and we deduce from that the assumption that gives rise to this absolute state. But in actuality, it is context driven, and based on the level of awareness you have. If you're fully conscious, you'll see both sides to every event. Yeah. But if you're ignorant, you're going to see one side, and if you're very ignorant, you're going to only see black and white. So when we're living by our highest values, we're more relativist. When we're living by our lower values and unfulfilled and in our amygdala, we're more absolutist. And there's a scale of people throughout that entire spectrum in morality. And so as a person, and usually the lower the socioeconomic and the lower the education, the more likely to be the absolutist. And the more educated they are, the more reasonable they are, the more they've developed their abstract IQs and have more emotional intelligence, the more relativist they are.
Thank you. Fantastic answer. And yes, I was thinking about Israel and Iran and all the fundamental things that are going on in the world at the moment.
Can I share another story? Can
Yeah, please do.
all right. I had the opportunity about 5 years ago to mediate a conflict between 5 Israeli leaders and 3 Palestinian leaders, which was interesting.
Yeah, can imagine.
When I walk in the room, the leaders were there. I walk in right about the time I'm supposed to begin.
Yeah.
And this one leader of Israel asked, put his hand up, Herb, and she said, Dr. Demartini, do you believe in absolute evil? And so for fun, I said, absolutely not. And she said, well, I do. And so I came back on her and I said, is that possibly why you spent 14 years trying to negotiate and you haven't gotten anywhere? Because if you see your opponent as absolute evil, how are you going to negotiate with that?
Mm,
Not very bright.
yeah.
So she paused for a second, and the mediator who was in the room chuckled. And I said, since you brought that up, let's begin on that. What do you perceive to be a trait, an action, or inaction that you label to be absolute evil? And she said, intolerance. Intolerance. And I said, okay, so you believe that somebody who's intolerant is absolute evil. And I said, great. Now I'm going to ask you a very important question because sometimes we point our finger at other people and we don't realize that there's some back. In the New Testament, in Romans 2:1, it says, beware of judging others, for what you judge in others, you do the same thing.
Yes.
So I said, so before we work and address absolute evil and intolerance, we have to make sure that we're not projecting our intolerance onto people. So let's go to a moment where and when you perceive yourself displaying or demonstrating the same trait, intolerance. And she said, I pride myself on not being intolerant. Now, she's intolerant in that moment, but doesn't see it. I pride myself in not being that. And so she was in a moment of absolute perspective that I pride myself on not being intolerant. So I realized that she was kind of being a little bit dense, right? Not willing to see and reflect. So I said, well, because I'm the authority in the room, I'm now mediating. So I said, I'm certainly intolerant. I remember I was intolerant at the airport recently, and I gave an example. And at a restaurant when I ordered food, and I was been intolerant with my girlfriend sometimes, and definitely intolerant with my kids. And I started rattling off examples in a diverse area of my life, really through almost every area. I gave examples where it is, so she could possibly see some that she might be able to own.
Yeah.
And slowly but surely, she goes, well, in that context, okay, I have been intolerant with my husband. Of course, I can imagine. then and then she said, well, I've been intolerant, yes, with things not being done a certain way. And I said, okay. So we started going, so don't you think it would be wise for us to go through and become reflective and look at where we're intolerant? Because what's been found is that we only judge other people, and we only resent other people when it represents a part of us we feel ashamed of. So
Mm.
let's make sure that we're not doing that and projecting that because that'll undermine the negotiation. So let's go and find out where you're doing it. And I'll be glad to come up with one. For every one you come up with, I'll come up with two for myself. And so I'm having her come up with it. And we worked for an hour and a half on her intolerance. And she came up with 39 examples of intolerance until she realized with tears in her eyes, I am intolerant.
Mm.
Because she had been blinded and was in an absolute state.
Mm.
So she was ignoring where she's been doing it and exaggerating what he's been doing it. So he was always that way. She was never that way.
Hmm.
And that is not, you will never negotiate from that. It's an absolute position. It's like a debate where everybody both thinks they're right and you don't get anywhere. It's not a dialectic where you actually both learn from each other.
Yeah.
And I'm trying to get them into a dialectic, not a debate, so they can have a synthesis and both grow from each other instead of just make everybody make their side right and their song wrong.
Yeah.
So as she did that and she had a tear in her eye, uh, she got humbled. And then I said, now, now that we have acknowledged that you have intolerance, like he does, this gentleman, who happened to be 7 feet across from her across the room, but she never brought his name up, but it was obvious it was.
Yeah.
Um, I said, now go to a moment when you actually perceived him. So it's not hearsay. Go to a moment and you actually, because hearsay is what people think. They can make things up. Go to an actual moment where you actually perceived he was intolerant. She goes, okay, I'm there. Great. You got the where in the when? You're there? Great. How did it benefit you that he was intolerant in that moment? She says, it didn't. I said, well, then that means it's absolute evil. So what's the benefit of him doing that? I can't see any. Well, let's go look again. What's the benefit of him being intolerant in that moment? How did it benefit your life? I have no idea. I said, you answered that in less than a hundredth of a second, which means you didn't even attempt to look. So let's look for the first time. What's the benefit? And she paused. And so I threw out some potential ones that might be.
Yeah.
I said, prior to him being intolerant, this individual being tolerant, what were you doing in your life? I was a mother with 2 kids. I said, and when this intolerance occurred and you perceived it, what did it catalyze in you? Well, I got really angry and I started studying. Okay, so did you expand your knowledge as a result of his intolerance? I did indeed. Did you end up going back to school? She said, I did. I actually went and got my doctorate degree. So you end up getting a doctorate degree as a result of being catalyzed by his intolerance. She goes, yes. And was that in social political science? Because that's what you're leader in. Yes. And did you end up getting leadership roles as a result of that because of the knowledge you had? I did. And didn't you write a book? Yes. So is there some sort of causal correlation between what he did and what you're now doing? Is you're now a known author and haven't you actually interacted with some of the leaders of the world? She goes, I have. Is that catalyzed by his intolerance initially? She goes, now that I think about it, if I hadn't experienced that, I probably would not have gone that whole journey. And as a result of it, did you meet amazing people around the world? She goes, I have. And do you have influence? Yes. If he had never been intolerant, you never experienced his intolerance, where would you be today? She paused. She said, I would be with my kids and family. Would that have been a greater life? She goes, I can't guarantee that. It would have been a much less influential life for sure. I said, did you have a desire to make some sort of influence and make a difference? She said, I did. And did his intolerance catalyze that? Yes. And I started stacking up the benefits she got, the people she's met, the things she's learned, the influence she's had, um, the power she's developed socially, intellectually, in family. How did it help her family? Well, they're now known. The kids are now grown up and they're now involved. The cause that she did socially, the spiritual mission that she's involved in, because it's sort of a spiritual mission because she was Jewish versus Arabic, right? And Islamic.
Mm.
So she started to realize that in almost every area of her life, she started getting advantages as a result of his moment of intolerance that she
Mm.
perceived.
Yeah.
I said, then I hit her with a left fielder. I came in with a bat. I said, are you really committed to resolving a conflict? Or are you feeding off this opportunity that you've gotten for your influence and leadership? Because if you spent 14 years and you haven't mediated anything, you haven't got any accomplished on that, Are you just wanting a following and wanting to be known and wanting to, and are you using this to your advantage, or are you actually committed to resolving a conflict? And she paused. She got humbled. I said, because it's okay. I'm not going to judge either one, but you want to be honest with yourself, because if you're not getting a result, somehow you must have an unconscious motive for something different.
Yeah.
Otherwise, you'd get your result. So are you really just becoming known? And is this what your objective is? And you got now notoriety and education, everything else, and you're leveraging this, and you got a bunch of people that are angry at this man. And so you're leveraging that group and you're feeding off that group to get your power and influence. And she was wise enough and humble enough to admit that that was partly true,
Mm.
which I was impressed by.
Mm.
And I said, I can understand that. That's cool. I'm not negating that. I leverage things in my advantage too. I'm not going to judge that. But you want to be honest about why you're doing what you're doing. Otherwise, you're actually wondering why you're not getting what you say you're going after.
Yeah.
Anyway, I said, so what's the benefit that you got now out of his intolerance? And she started rattling off the benefits until she got 42 benefits. And when she got 42 benefits, she broke down in tears again and messed up her makeup and excused herself to go to the bathroom. When that happened, the gentleman that she was talking about that was intolerant came up to me and said, Dr. Demartini, that was really an amazing experience and session. Um, I was vicariously doing the same thing in my own mind while you were doing this with her. And two things I note. I could have swore she was talking about me, and I said she was. He says, I kind of thought that. And then I started to reflect and realize how intolerant I have been and how absolute it is and why it happened. And he said, because I was driving a tank and I had to run over an entire family and kill a family because of my senior officer. And I defected and joined the opposite side because of what I thought I was doing inside my culture. I'm actually from the same country that she's from, but I went over and defected, and she doesn't know that. And so when she came back, the tension in the room was different. They had a conversation and they mediated. Amazing accomplishment. And after I finished that day, it was a really amazing day. Um, we, I came back to South Africa, and she asked me and invited me to come on her podcast, not well, radio show podcast. It was a multiple system, it's all the different social medias plus radio show.
Yeah.
She reaches a lot of people, a lot of influence. And she asked me to come on the show, and I was thinking this ought to be interesting because now she's talking to the people who are her followers. It'd be interesting to see if what she did that day is still carried over into that show.
Yeah.
And this lady showed integrity, leadership, and courage because she told the entire story on the show. And she said that she was perpetuating her anger because of her own wounds and actually claiming to be a mediator, but actually was using it for her own influence and power. And she realized that she had to be willing to be integral about her own message and mission to get the result done at the expense of possibly losing followers. And she took a risk, but she didn't lose the followers.
Mm.
She educated them on the difference between absolutism and relativism.
Yeah.
I hope that story made sense.
Oh, it's the perfect story for this conversation. Thank you. Yeah, that's amazing. That's a stunning example. I will share this interview with great appreciation for what you've contributed. Thank you. So it is probably a quite a nice and neat segue into my other question, being, is there anything else you wanted to add on to that one though before I go to the other question?
With the amygdala in
Hmm.
systems one thinking assigns valency, which is emotional charge, of either positive or negative, prey or predator orientation to each stimulus. The stimulus comes in through the senses, the receptors,
Yes.
comes into the spinal cord or brainstem, goes up into the thalamus, and if it's more objective, it goes up into the cortex. If it's not, it goes over to the amygdala for survival response. So the thalamus is kind of the relay station. Does it go, is it a survival response or is it something that's cognitive for thrival,
Yeah.
future? One
Yeah.
is living by hindsight, one's living by foresight.
Yeah.
So this amygdala assigns valency to things, and it's stored in the hippocampus as a memory. And anything that's absolute is stored in the memory for emergencies and makes us live with compounded anxieties or fantasies and makes us not. The difference between what's actually out there in the world and what we realize there is the difference between actuality and reality.
Mm.
And so people live in distorted realities, stored because of wounds and fantasies, fantasies about how it should be and wounds about how it has been.
Yeah.
And we get trapped in that amygdala's response. But our brain is set up to evolve and develop.
Mm.
Even ontologically, ontogenically, during from the time we start out as a zygote as a single cell and we eventually come out and born and we keep developing, the brain is developing from about the third week all the way throughout the rest of our life and then becomes neuroplastically developing based on how it's being used, the brain. So it develops the amygdala as an animal affectionate area of the brain prior to the executive center coming along where there's more objective and reason. And so humanity has evolved that way. I was involved in a movie called Oh My God, and
Mm.
it was a question that a producer asked people around the world about religion. Did God make man or did man make God?
Okay.
And we obviously make anthropomorphic deities out of things to protect us from our phobias. And so our amygdala creates anthropomorphic deities to protect us from our phobias. And our executive center uses more abstraction, more mathematics, and thinks in terms of science and cosmological ideas about, about the universe.
Yeah.
And so as we go through it, the early stages are absolutes because we have to protect ourselves because we're frightened of things.
Mm.
Imagine being out in nature and there's an animal out there and we don't know it and we're frightened of it until we get into groups where we can protect ourselves from the animal, where we make animal gods to protect us from that, right? We create a god that we appease to the animal god to protect us from the animal, or appease from the weather, the rain god or the thunder god to protect us from those things that we're frightened about. Well, that's all amygdala based.
Yeah.
And so the evolution of even religious morality is a development of the brain as time has evolved.
Mm.
So we've gone from kind of an animistic state where everything could be animated and something frighten us, all the way to a polytheistic state, to a monotheistic state, to an anthropomorphic state, to eventually metaphysics from mysticism, to eventually mythologies, metaphysics, to science, and then mathematical science, abstract science. So you can see the evolution of the brain and the evolution of how we reason and process information from absolutes to relatives.
Mm. Yes. You are always very good at drawing all the connections between the disciplines, seeing that universal principle that goes through everything. And in relation to the example you just gave, the Israelis and the Palestinians, I would encourage anyone who is watching and listening to this interview and has not experienced Dr. Demartini before to go and check out his program and his book, The Breakthrough Experience, because you were basically taking this woman through the breakthrough experience process. I'm recognizing all the steps along the way as you went through it. And it is probably the most powerful process that anyone can do to balance their perception on something that's giving them an emotional charge. So, yeah, great. Great story. Great answer to the question. Thank you, Dr. Demartini.
Yep.
So I'll bring in this second question that I think is kind of nicely aligned with it. And that is a question about randomness and order. So the theory, the principle of divine order is a core part of your work. And I was very inspired. I've always been interested in universal laws. And so I wrote a novel called The Hidden Order. So we've had this alignment. So this question comes from someone who is close to me, who is struggling with the idea of order and wants to know, where does randomness fit into the grand scheme of things? So is there any such thing as an accident, or is everything governed by law? So the child who runs out onto the road and is, unexpectedly and is killed, was that an accident, or did the child have some sort of divine appointment, with the driver who came and knocked them over, So all those, for want of a better word, shocking stories, the rapes and all these things that it seems as if it wasn't their fault, it happened to them. Um, if you could expand on this idea of randomness versus order.
One of my favorite topics.
Yes, I figured.
When I was 18 years old, and I was learning how to read because, I had learning challenges as a
Yeah.
child. My uncle, who is my mom's brother, as a gift, sent two giant 6 by 6 by 6 foot wooden crates full of books to our house on a flatbed truck.
Yeah.
Because my mom said, my son is learning how to read. He wants to now devour and read everything he can.
Yeah.
He was a professor at MIT and a physicist and chemist and an engineer. He was a very bright guy. So he sent these great books. And one of the books that he sent was a discourse on metaphysics by Gottfried Wilhelm Leibniz, or
Hmm.
Leibniz, depending on how you say it in German.
Yeah.
When I opened up that book, and I always had a dictionary with me because every word I didn't know, I'd looked it up. He said that no human being could ever improve upon the perfection that already is.
Hmm.
And he had a theological, but also a mathematical and also a scientific perspective, because he was the one that helped develop the calculus the same time that Newton did
Hmm.
in mathematics. So he's a very bright guy. He had a major influence in a lot of different industries. But he said that there was a perfection, a hidden order. And for the way he stated it, I brought tears to my eyes. And anytime you get a gamma synchronicity in the brain, that's a tear aha moment, most people have learned to listen to that, pay close attention to that. There's something there.
Mm.
So I went on a quest. What is this perfection? What is this hidden order? I want to know what that was. So that led me to study order and disorder, or order and randomness, sometimes called. And I went to Clausius, and I went to Boltzmann. These are guys that were in that field at the time.
Yep.
And I started to study what exactly are these laws of thermodynamics, what is order to disorder, because there's a law that's called the second law of thermodynamics, that order tends to go to disorder over time.
Yep.
So the arrow of time makes things go from order to disorder. But Erwin Schroeder in 1944 wrote a book called What is Life? And he coined the term negative entropy, negentropy.
Yep.
Luigi Fontoppi, around that same time, wrote on what is syntropy. So he had a different term for the same thing. It's the tendency to go from disorder to order. And we know in nature now that there's self-organizing systems that emerge. But the debate is that emerging at the expense ultimately of entropy winning and leading to disorder? And this is being debated.
Mm.
Both scientists are still entrenched in the idea that everything goes from order to disorder. Nothing can reverse the other way. But yet life evolves, and there's more and more life evolving, and there's self-organizing solar systems and self-organizing galaxies and self-organizing galaxy clusters and self-organizing super galaxy clusters.
Yep.
And so how did the Big Bang even come about, they think, unless there's somehow something organized order? So these are debated, order and chaos, order and disorder. But later on, there's a couple guys that got a Nobel Prize at MIT for information theory.
Hmm.
And they said that disorder is missing information,
Yep.
and entropy is missing information. So if you actually go study and look up the word entropy online, you'll see that it means also missing information. And it's based on the arrow of time. So as we move forward, as we lose information, we move towards entropy, disorder, away from order.
Yep.
But Stephen Wolfram, mathematician, asked the question, uh, is entropy really missing information? Or is it a you might say, a computational boundary?
Mm-hmm.
A computational boundary means that we just don't know how to ask the right question to discover the information.
Mm-hmm.
This is what Boltzmann said back when I first read it at 18. He said, probabilistic statistics, right?
Mm-hmm.
Stochastic information that's probabilistic, that we don't know all the information. It just means missing information and uncertainty. If we knew the answer to the question and had the proper algorithm to discover the information, it may not actually be a final description of the universe, entropy. Our entire cosmology is based on it. We're going to go to heat death eventually, and
Yep.
entropy,
Yep.
and gravitational entropy.
Yep.
So I've never been satisfied with that.
Mm.
And I took the laws of thermodynamics and I said, I want to go and apply the laws of thermodynamics to human behavior. So I started doing that starting at 18. I'm going on 71. See, that's how long I've been doing it. 75, 53 years almost. And I started asking new sets of questions because the quality of your life is based on the quality of the questions you ask. Because what does questions do? It makes unconscious information, missing information, conscious, reclaimed information.
Yep.
Plato said that all learning is recollection
Yes.
of what's already known. Immanuel Kant said there were categories and may a priori information. It may already be innate within the individual, and we just haven't woken it up. We didn't ask the right question, the right algorithm.
Mm.
So I've never been satisfied with entropy as the final solution to the death of the universe. It's a death physics, according to Tipler, instead of a life physics, which is negentropy. And life and death seem to be balanced in the equation, in nature. So in a conservation of information, energy, and matter would imply that, which is the first law of thermodynamics. So I asked, is the heat that's dissipated in entropy, which is called enthalpy, is that just wasted energy, or can that heat be used somehow, and can you find information inside that? Now, there's some that Leonard Susskind in his cosmology said, if you take a piece of paper that's got a bunch of letters on it and it's got a bunch of words and it's got information on it and you burn it, is the information lost? No, not lost. It's in a new form, and it may be in a form that you can't recognize, but if you were to rearrange it and play with it and ask a different algorithm, you might discover the information because it has to be conserved at the quantum level.
Yeah.
So then I asked the question, how do I access the missing information? And that's all about the quality questions you ask.
Yeah.
So I started to look at how we perceive information. If we're in our amygdala, we distort information and we automatically make it where we're seeing with a false positive the positive without the negative, and we're ignorant, or we're seeing the negative without the positive, and we're ignorant. When you're infatuated with somebody, you're conscious of the upsides, unconscious of the downsides. When you're resentful to somebody, you're conscious of the downsides, unconscious of the upsides. When you love somebody, you see both sides simultaneously. Think about somebody you've been with for a long period of time that you just love, and you go, there's things I like and dislike. No question. I can see them both at the same time.
Yep.
And now I get to love this person, respect him, instead of infatuate or resent.
Yep.
So maybe, just maybe, if we ask the right questions, I thought, could I ask complementary opposite questions to see the opposite? Now, Heraclitus, 6th century BC, said that there's a unity of opposites. Will Durant said that was the fundamental system of all life. Hegel used it for his synthesis to create his spiritual experience. Could we make a science that could allow us to ask questions to have a spiritual experience? Because theology typically thinks of a divine order, science tends to think in terms of disorder. and probabilistic. And you can never get to the truth. All you can do is get to a probability, a higher probability. So the inductive approach is an approximation. The deductive assumes that it already was there. So if you were to go and ask proper questions, maybe you could create a synthesis of opposites and take the information and its opposite information and create a dialectic and a synthesis by doing it. So I started to experiment, which is why I developed my methodology,
Yeah.
to ask questions to make you aware of what you've overlooked and to help people find the order in things. So I every weekend in the breakthrough experience, as you know, I have people that goes, well, so and so abused me. And I go, okay, that's a label. That's an absolute label, abuse. Doesn't tell you what they did, just gives you a generalized label, which is a classical amygdala response.
Yeah.
I said, what exactly did this person do? Well, they verbally criticized me in front of people. Okay, great. So the actual action is verbal criticism. And then I go in there and I find out, and you're now resenting them. And now you're seeing the drawbacks. You're not seeing any benefits to it. I then go in there and I said, all right, where do you do that? And I have them go in and identify where they've done it until the quantity and quality is equal. So there's a reflective awareness, which is one of the highest levels of awareness self-actualized people can have. And when they do that, they soften some of the judgment.
Yeah.
They go, well, I do the same thing. And then I go to that moment where they actually do the behavior and they go, what's the upsides? Like I did with the lady. And they start to see the benefits to it. And now instead of resenting it, now they're actually going, you know what? I almost feel like I want to thank them for that.
Mm.
So now instead of being resentful and blind to the upsides, they're now seeing both sides and they're seeing where they've done the same thing. Then they realize also that the reason why they were angry is it because it reminded them of things they had done that they felt ashamed about. Well, they felt ashamed about it because they were indoctrinated by some moral hypocrisy about how what something's good and evil. So the very thing that causes the missing information is the moral hypocrisy that people try to impose. To be good, never bad; to be positive, never negative; to be one-sided, which is not possible. It's impossible. You can't get a one-sided magnet.
Mm.
So the very source of the entropy is the belief systems of the polarity, that one can exist without the other, which causes the misinformation.
Yeah.
So entropy is a byproduct of our moral ineptitude in that respect, based on our perception. So I asked him what was the benefit until they were balanced. And then I went into the moment where he did it to who he did it to and found the benefits to the people he did it to until there was no shame and there was no resentment and there was reflective awareness. And then I asked him, where has this person done the opposite behavior to break the label that they're always that way or most of the time that way? And he realized that no, they're not. They're a human being with a set of values. When you communicate in their values, they're nice as a pussycat. If you challenge their values, they're mean as a tiger. And then I went in and asked him, at the very moment you're perceiving it, this behavior, who is doing the opposite to them? And they were oblivious to this. That was missing in their awareness. It was unconscious. But their brain, for every memory, there's an anti-memory. And if it's a painful memory, you dissociate and create the anti-memory. You'll either create it or it'll be there. So it's real or virtual. So if I go in and I ask them, where was it exactly at that moment somebody doing the opposite? And I get them really present in the moment of perception, their intuition pops it out and they go, whoa. And then they realize there was a pair of opposites, a unity of opposites that they'd overlooked. And all that information was missing. And therefore they thought this was a random angry event that was wrong. It was evil. But when they're actually getting through this, they realize, wait a minute, this is actually serving me and making sure that I break through my own judgments of myself and transcend my judgments and limited views on other people and helping me broaden my awareness. So this person I think is this evil person is actually my teacher, guiding me to a greater awareness. And then I go and ask them if they had done what you hoped they would have done, which is the opposite, what would have been the drawback? Because they're addicted to the opposite because of the moral hypocrisy. And then I go in, I find out if they had done what you thought they should have done, what would have been the drawback? And they crack the fantasy and they have tears of gratitude and they see the whole thing. And when I'm done, I said, now do you think there was a disorder or some sort of mistake? Or can you see that maybe there was a hidden order and you're now in a state of grace and love for this person?
Mm.
And they're in tears of gratitude and they see the hidden order. And now there's no missing information.
Yeah.
So there is a hidden order in the apparent chaos, but it's knowing how to ask the right question, the algorithms, and to break through the thing that stops us from ever seeing it, which is the moral hypocrisy. So that leads us to Michael Montaigne, the French philosopher, and many others who studied morals. He went around the world and he said, is there is there a morality that this is good and evil? And is there a place in the world that has exactly the opposite? In America, um, it's kind of like taboo to marry somebody under a certain age. Although you can legally get married at 15,
Mm.
even down to 12, if you have parental consent.
Yep.
But if some older man, 50s, marries a 9-year-old, it's taboo in America. But in Islam, in
Mm.
the Middle East, it's honored because Muhammad married somebody very young.
Mm.
So in one culture, it's bad. Another culture, it's good. And
Mm.
so if you label something and somebody does something and you label it bad and there's no good in it, or label something good and there's no bad in it, well, you just blocked yourself and created your own ignorance to be able to see it. And I'm now thinking that maybe entropy is a byproduct of a cultural morality that's absolute, not relative, creating the perceptions of disorder instead of seeing the hidden order in their life.
Yeah. Mm.
So you can't say those two questions you had about disorder and order and relativism and absolutism are correlated.
Yes. Yes. Totally. Thank you. Thank you. And there was another fantastic demonstration of the breakthrough experience methodology that Dr.
Well,
Demartini.
that's the reason I've been teaching the breakthrough 1,238 times now, um, is because I've seen what happens when people get trapped in absolutes.
Mm.
I mean,
Mm.
if you stop and look at the challenges that are going on in the world today, it's primarily because of absolutisms.
Yeah.
They're
Have
making, when I was in Iran, I spoke in Iran 3 times.
mhm.
And I spoke to the government and to corporates, and even the president was listening in. And everybody I met there at the time, we have different times and different leaders now, and it's even gotten more radical, more fundamental now. But at the time, the people were amazing, absolutely loving people. I didn't see nobody really treated me. There was an absolutist group that wanted to debate me on television on an issue, but that even disbanded. And as they started listening to me lecture, they decided not to do it because they didn't find anything offensive. But the people were people. We're all people.
Yeah.
And we all have moments where we get our buttons pushed and get into our amygdala and get into absolutes and say things like that to our even our loved ones. Well, you're always mean to me, or you're never listen to me, or something. And in those moments, we're in that absolute state.
Mm.
But then we calm down. Our executive center comes in, our cortex comes over. We moderate it, and we start to see things differently and realize we said that, but we didn't really mean that. But we said it. At
Yeah.
the time, it seemed real, but it was just our amygdala going off and hijacking us from being present.
Yeah.
And then we start to see the order. So we have the capacity to perceive life from disorder to order.
Mm.
And the more aware we are, the more it's order. Now, the reason why we call it the hidden order and why I think you called it the hidden order is because it's hidden from most people because most people are trapped in their moral hypocrisies.
Yeah.
But it's not actually hidden to those that open their eyes and ask
Yep.
the right questions
Yep.
and look carefully.
Yes. Yes. Absolutely. Absolutely, she says. Um, Dr. Demartini, have you had anyone go through the breakthrough experience with who's had an experience similar to that example I gave of having, say, their child run across the road and be knocked down, die or injured or whatever, and then have them go through that process and see it differently, balance their perception on that? Have you had something like that?
Um, Hundreds of times.
Yeah, I figured.
Hundreds.
Mm.
Can I share one?
Yeah, please do because that would create a nice completion on that question. Yeah.
Okay. So I get a call. Well, I get scheduled by my team that there's a consult. So I get a call in on a Zoom the Zoom sent, and I get online and I get on with this gentleman. He was an influential entrepreneur in Africa, and he had a big company, a very wealthy man.
Hmm.
He was driving down a highway, freeway, and all of a sudden, two cars came up on the side of him. One came in the front of him, one came in the back of him, and locked him in on the freeway. Got out with machine guns, came to his door, banged out the window, um, opened the door, grabbed him, put a hood over his head where he couldn't see, and stuck him in a trunk of one of the cars, left his car on the freeway, and then they drove off. Now, this is right on the freeway. But, what are you going to do? You're going to stop these guys with machine guns? No, you're going to keep driving. So they take him for hours in a drive to the middle of nowhere. And he's in a kind of a barn kind of thing. And they want a ransom. They've got his wife and kids, and they want a large ransom. Okay. Most people would call that a bit traumatic. What do you think? A bit traumatic?
Yeah.
A little bit.
Most people, yeah, for sure.
Most people would say it. Well, his therapist did when they finally thing. Anyway, he had a big business, but that doesn't mean you have liquid capital that you can just go send.
Mm.
So he had to raise the capital and convert things into capital to be able to pay this ransom. And he didn't want to lose his kids, and there's no way he had any contact with anybody because the kids were under scrutiny also. So they couldn't just call the police because they were surrounded.
Mm.
So he figured, I'll just pay it. It was millions of dollars, but I'll pay it.
Mm.
And take a risk. They still may kill me and them, but what good is my money going to do then?
Yeah.
So he decided to do it. Now, police would have probably negotiated, but anyway, he paid it. They let him out. He had to walk a long way and come back and find his family.
Mm.
So he was under post-traumatic stress disorder.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now he called me because somebody said, this is going on and you're still having intrusive thoughts. You can't sleep. You're having anxiety disorder, panic attacks,
Yeah.
da, 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 da. And so I get on the Zoom with him. And I said, let's go to the moment when you're in the car. They put you in the car. And we're going to go frame by frame by frame by frame through this so-called trauma. And I'm going to ask you questions you've not been asked by, I'm sure, by all your therapists and specialists and police. In that moment, what's the content of your mind when you're in the trunk? He said, I was constrained and I could barely move. So I had constraint. Great. I wrote it down. What else? Darkness. Can't see. I got a hood over my head and I'm in a dark trunk. I'm in pitch black. I'm constrained in pitch black. Great. What else? I am terrified that I'm never going to see my kids or wife again. So I'm afraid they're going to die. They're going to kill them, no matter what I do. I'm also assuming I'm going to be killed. And I'm thinking about all the people that are in my business, all the people that I'm going to be letting down.
Mm-hmm.
So he looked at the content of what was going on in his mind. Most of it was his wife and kids.
Yeah.
I said, okay, the mind can never have an experience, a perception, without the opposite perception. If the perception is painful, you will dissociate and your brain will create an association with the opposite to counterbalance it, to keep the excitatory and inhibitory ratios in the transmitters in the brain balanced, to stabilize the brain for homeostasis. I said, so let's go to that moment. And the moment you're perceiving dark, get present. What was light? He said, wow, that's interesting. I'm in a field and it's extremely bright in my mind. And in the moment when you felt constrained, the brain will create from all the experiences in your life that has ever represented the opposite of constraint, freedom, whatever you associate with freedom will pop in the brain. He said, I'm in a field, I'm running freely in a field with birds and butterflies around me in a bright, sunny day. And when you felt you were going to not see your family again, they were going to die, I was holding hands with my children and my wife running freely through this field. His mind was creating this anti-memory. It's called an anti-memory in Neuron Magazine, 2016, March the 17th, if you look at the article. And in that moment, when I showed him that they were both there and not one and ignoring the other, when the two together come together, one that creates a sympathetic response, one that creates a parasympathetic response, the brain goes from beta waves in the brain, which is, a stress response, and delta waves, which now is the unconscious, to an alpha theta wave and create a gamma synchronicity. And he all of a sudden got a tear of gratitude and aha moment. And he realized that the trauma was only because he was only aware of half of it. The ecstasy was the other half. When he put the two together, it made a feeling of love.
Hmm.
Love is always a synthesis and synchronicity of complementary opposites.
Yeah.
So when I went through frame by frame by frame by frame,
Yeah.
and took the trauma out. And he was not traumatized because he saw that his brain had both. He also realized that prior to this event, he was working extensively. He was overweight, he was under hypertension, and he was neglecting his family and his wife. And there was hints that his wife may leave him and take the kids, and then collapse the company financially for taking half. So he was sitting on the threshold, and he was hiring consultants to try to scale up his business and delegate more, so he had a little bit more time for the family, but he didn't have a value on that. It was lower on his value, so he really wanted to just build his business like a monstrous business. But what happened is, I said, so now what's the benefit? Now that we cleared all the different frames, what was the benefit of this happening? And he said, I realized how much I love my family. I said, how much is that worth? Put a dollar value on that. He said, that's worth millions. I've been taking him for granted. I said, so now you get to appreciate it. She says, now that I'm with my wife, we're like partners again. And my kids were doing things. I said, what's another benefit that came out of this? He said, I lost 20 pounds. And now that I'm back with my family, my wife was into yoga, and I'm doing yoga and breathing, and I'm eating natural foods and eating healthier foods, and my overall health is definitely upgraded. I said, how much is that worth? He said, I don't even know how to put a dollar value on that.
Mm.
I said, what's another benefit? He said, while I was gone for 2.5 weeks raising the money, my team stepped up and ran the business without me, which is what I've been hiring consultants to try to get to happen, but I couldn't. I kept interfering with their autonomy. But when I was not there, they had no choice but to step up, and they took it on.
Mm.
He said, so I actually got the company I wanted, the wife and family I wanted, and the health that I was concerned about, because I was a time bomb. And I said, what's another benefit? And he started crying. He said, the amount that my business went up when I got out of its way was more than the ransom. He said, right now, I paid a lot of money for consultants that didn't get the job done. And I was hoping for certain outcomes. And it was this event that got me my outcome. I'm almost wondering now if my unconscious motive created this thing and I was unaware of it. And maybe there was a hidden order to the apparent chaos. And he said, right now, after talking to you, 2 hours and 10 minutes is all we spent.
Mm.
After now, long-term therapy for post-traumatic stress disorder.
Yeah.
Disorder is a label of missing information
Yeah.
that we pose on people and keep them trapped in it sometimes. And when he got through, he said, I almost feel like contacting these people and saying thank you.
Mm.
So I actually end up winning and thanked him.
Mm.
He was grateful. He
Yeah.
went home to his wife after the consult, and she sent me a letter. And she said, my husband tried to explain some of the things you did. I would never have imagined those kind of questions or those type of things, but all I know is my husband's home and he's back.
Mm.
I have my husband. He's now not, he's sleeping, he's present, he's grateful, he's loving the kids, he's with me, he's healthier, the business is doing well. He's contemplating what he can do to delegate more and grow the business without getting involved as much. I don't know how to say thank you, but I really believe that this is one of the greatest blessings that happened in our life. And I would never have believed it until he came back and explained what happened. And from that new perspective, I'm actually grateful for that. I have what I've been dreaming about. My husband has what he's been dreaming about, and we did not know how to get there. Now, the question is that divine order? Is it human sovereignty? Now, here's an interesting question about the paradox of free will versus predestination.
Okay.
If you infatuate with somebody and you're conscious of the upside and unconscious of the downside, and they occupy space and time in your mind and run you, and you're in bondage and have intrusive thoughts thinking about them, or you resent somebody and you're conscious of the downside and unconscious of the upside, and you have intrusive thoughts and can't get them out of your mind, and you have insomnia, which is a symptomatology to let you know you have an imbalanced absolute ratio of perception or relatively absolute ratio, then your brain is letting you know that you have an imbalanced ratio and you're unconscious and you have missing information.
Yeah.
And if you're infatuated, you're going to want to change you to try to be like them, try to live in their life. And if you're resentful, you're going to want to try to change them to be like you, to live in your life. Neither one of those are successful. They're non-sustainable. They're futile.
Yeah.
Just try to fix your husband and try to make him you. Won't work. And him try to make you him. Won't work. So both of those are non-sustainable futilities. So those absolute or moving towards absolute perspectives create futility as a feedback to guide you back into the relative understanding. So you have reflective awareness and have balanced perspective and see neither positive nor negative, but see love.
Yeah.
Now, when you bring all those back into balance and see that whatever you were too humble to admit or too proud to admit that you see in them inside you, and you have reflective awareness, and you bring the unconscious back into conscious and become fully conscious and see that there's a synthesis and synchronicity of opposites in those experiences, your desire to change you relative to them or them relative to you disappears. And there's nothing to fix or change. There's a perfection.
Mm.
Now your will matches what is, which could be theologically called divine will, predestination. So you're really now freed in your will because you're not in bondage to the things that have intrusive thoughts. You have a free will. In that moment of free will, you now have the order.
Mm.
You're now, human sovereignty is now matching, in a sense, the divine providence. Your determinism is now matching indeterminism. Your necessity is now matching contingency. Your free will is now matching predestination.
Mm.
But when you're trying to get a one-sided world because of a moral hypocrisy and the other side smacks you because the magnet has two sides, then you realize that you're striving for that which is unobtainable and trying to avoid that which is unavoidable, which is a source of your futility and your unfulfillment and your suffering.
Mm.
And now you're in the debate and uncertainty because of the ignorance of this question. So I really believe that the wisdom of asking quality questions to liberate us from that which is trapping us allows us to see the hidden order in the apparent chaos. And it was there the whole time. It was just our computational boundary, which is our belief system that morally hypocrisies have taught us that there's good and evil. And when it's good, you're blind to the downsides. When it's evil, you're blind to the upsides. And that blinds people. The entire moral construct can blind people. Instead of actually see that there's nothing but love. And don't stop until you see it by asking quality questions and liberate yourself and be graced by the magnificence of what we could call the divine perfection.
Mm. Thank you. I think we both had a tear in our eye with that story that you told, that man and his insights. Yeah, beautiful. Thank you very much, John.
Thank you.
Thank you. Well, I will share this interview far and wide because I think there was so much wisdom in it that I hope many people are going to not only listen to this, but follow your work, Dr. Demartini, and go and really book in and do the breakthrough experience and learn more about what you do. Would you like to, before you go, just share a little bit about what you are doing at the moment and where the next breakthrough experience is happening and, whatever you'd like to share about your current
When is this going to be airing?
ASAP, actually. So I will aim to have it up in the next 24 hours or so.
Hey, if it's that quick. Well, right now, I just finished doing the breakthrough experience last week in Sydney. This
Mhm.
week, I just did it in Brisbane. And this following weekend, I'm doing it in Perth. So I'll be in Perth
It's next weekend,
midweek.
midweek. Yeah.
Thursday, I'll
Yep.
be in Perth and
Yes.
doing it there. And then, of course, that night, Sunday night, I have to go and get back on my ship in France. So I'll be back on my ship. But those are things that are happening. And if they want to get in contact with me, they just go to drdemartini.com.
Yes.
And
Brilliant.
my website is filled with information for people, but it also tells where I'm doing the breakthrough experience and programs.
Yep. Thank you. And I'll share that link in the description for the video as well. I thank you very much, Dr. Demartini, for your time and your wisdom and your generosity in
Thank you.
answering all those questions. And we'll let you go and we will speak again about health down the track.
Perfect. I love that topic.
Excellent. All right. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Liliane. Thank you again.
Thank you. See you then. Well, stand by.